The light is on and we are home. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Biola University, ranked as the most comprehensively Christian university in North America. My name is Brian Perez, and we are here live on this Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. If you've got a question for us today, give us a call. We are here till 4 p.m. Pacific time at 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. That's the best way to get an answer to your question. You can also send it in online on Facebook or Instagram, or by going to our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com. But no guarantee you'll get an answer if you send in your question online. We are primarily a radio program. We have phone lines that we pay for, so call us up. Use those phone lines, 888-564-6173. And answering your calls today, we've got Brian Broderson, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California, Dr. Bobby Conway, the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, whom you also see on the Christianity Still Makes Sense YouTube channel. And here once again is Dr. Scott Ray, the professor of philosophy and Christian ethics at Biola University, which we just talked about a few seconds ago. Biola.edu is the website to find out more about Biola. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program.
Thank you, Brian. Good to be with you again.
Yes.
Great to be here. Great to have Scott. I was, like I said, when I walked in, I was pleasantly surprised to see him sitting in this seat.
I appreciate that pleasantly part.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, the only difficulty when Ed's not here is we don't get the phone number given out quite as often because, you know, Ed's the phone number guy.
That's great, because I don't remember the phone number that you said.
Well, it's right there. Can you...
No, I can't read that. So.
Oh. It's okay. 888-564-6173.
Yeah, really quickly, of course, we've got this massive storm in Florida. I just saw that, you know, so you've got Milton bearing down on the West Coast, and then you've got these tornadoes on the East Coast. So like the whole state is in a state, and been praying, been communicating with people in the area. But yesterday we mentioned the opportunity, if you'd like to help with some relief for that. You can go to cgn.org, and there is a disaster relief button there. You can just click on that and give. And I want to thank those who responded yesterday, because some people did give, and I'm sure there's going to be tons and tons of stuff, you know, as the days unfold.
Yeah.
So,
Brian, I was wondering too, with Bobby pastoring in North Carolina.
Yeah.
How were you all affected by this?
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday, and you guys have kind of been spared, at least where Bobby is. You know, the Asheville
wonderful
got all the crazy flooding, but you still okay? No, nothing today.
Well, I don't know that I'm ever okay, but yes, the location I am is, and Charlotte fortunately was able to move through, but yeah, 90 minutes away, Scott, it was crazy. Asheville and some of the surrounding towns, I was sharing how people in our congregation have been going out, helping out, putting picks up, and just like one little rural area there, just absolutely wiped out. Today I talked to a person who was up there, and he just said it was so sad. You're walking down the streets of Boone, and you can just see people just walking maybe with a backpack, and they're just disheveled as if they don't even know where to go. They've lost their house, and they're just wandering. And boy, it's just a heartbreaking situation.
Wow. It's hard to believe something like that. Hard to fathom what's going on.
Can you hear?
Oh, you couldn't hear anything Bobby said?
No, I didn't.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay, Bobby, repeat everything you just said. 'Cause,
Yeah.
is that, do you
I
hear
was
him now?
sharing how, I'm now a quadrinist instead of a Trinitarian. And no, I'm just kidding. Hopefully you guys are plugged in. But if not, then it'll just be me and Brian Perez on the radio. So all those listening. Oh, okay. Well, Brian Broderson's with me. Okay, so
I'm watching.
here. I think I figured out what it is.
I'm watching Brian Perez try to sort this technical difficulty out.
Put this down, otherwise it's going to be really
That
loud.
in and of itself is fun.
Oh yeah, technology.
Live radio.
All right.
Now.
Yeah.
Let's see. Can you hear that, Scott? Much better. Okay.
Yay! Problem
Good.
solved.
Good.
All right. So Bobby said he's safe and sound,
Maybe not mentally.
but he did have some people. I guess they're 90 minutes away, right, Bobby, from Asheville, where
and I was just sharing. There's people just wandering around with a backpack. Like they've lost their home. They're just wandering. It's just a sad sight. They don't even know where to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to my friend in the Tampa area this morning, and he was. So I asked him because I think it was supposed to come ashore today, and he said 2 a.m. Will be when it'll hit land where he's at. So,
So 11 p.m. California time.
Hunkering down, yeah.
Man. All right, 888-564-6173 is the number to call with your questions today. We take all sorts of questions, but since we do have Dr. Scott Ray in the studio with us, his areas of expertise include, according to biola.edu, abortion, bioethics, business ethics, death and dying ethics, the death penalty, euthanasia, medical ethics, religion and American culture, ethics in general, lots of ethics stuff in there. But we want to start by talking about something that I guess is on Dr. Scott Ray's heart, and that's the Bible's view on work and vocation. Why is this suddenly on your mind?
Well,
Whoops, I didn't turn your mic back on.
Brian, where this started was in just watching my dad. He was the consummate business person, was one of those larger-than-life personalities who could sell anything to anybody. And he, in fact, I remember really vividly as a middle school student sitting around the dinner table, and my dad telling us, not telling us, but informing us that he was putting all the money he had saved for my siblings and my college education into this new company he was starting. And I wasn't super savvy financially at the time, but I knew enough to know that if the business went under, I was completely on my own for college. Now, it turned out the business paid for college many times over, and he came to faith sort of probably in his 40s or late 40s, and they were involved in a really great Bible teaching church. And I often asked him, we had conversations about how he connected his Christian faith with how he ran his business. And the only thing he could come up with was that churches don't generate revenue, they collect it. So somebody has to generate revenue for the thing that he, in his view, was the most important thing to God, which was what took place in the church building on a Sunday morning. And his job, those were the only dots he connected. And I realized after talking sort of repeatedly about this, that his view of this was not so much incorrect as it was incomplete. And he ran his business, I think, in a very godly way without knowing the language of what to call it. He had about 200 employees. He knew every one of them by name, greeted every one of them by name every morning in the first hour of the day.
Wow.
And just ran the business with integrity and very successfully. But that was the only thing he ever connected. And there was this monumental separation between what he spent the vast majority of his waking hours doing and his Christian faith. And I realized that I think that's the view of work that a lot of our folks in our churches have, where we just don't know quite how to connect all the dots. But we do know that churches need money, and somebody's got to be out there making it so I can give. But if I ask my seminary students at Talbot, I say, tell me about the men and women you serve in your church. If you took a poll and asked them how they connected their spiritual life with their work, what would they say? And my students, these are pastors, give me a deer in the headlights look, which tells me that, as my mentor put it, a mist in the pulpit makes for a fog in the pew. And I'm sure that was also true of the men and women that they were serving.
Yeah.
But the Bible has something totally different, I think, or radically different that completes the incomplete view that my dad had, that I think is very encouraging.
Yeah. Are you going to tell us?
If you wish.
You have to buy his book. It's his next book that comes out in October.
Well, we can't move on from that cliffhanger.
I understand.
I want to know.
I understand.
Let me put it this way. I will often ask groups of business people, tell me about your ministry in the workplace. And what do you think they say? Things like, I have compassion on my coworker. I pray for my coworkers if I have an opportunity to share my faith. Or some companies allow a Bible study or something like that during the lunch hour or something like that.
Right.
And they go on with things like that. And after a while, I point out to them that all these things you just told me are things that you are doing when you are not doing your job. And it's very rare that I have seen somebody connect the very work they do with their kingdom service in the workplace. It's almost always something that's after I'm done doing my job, then I can do sort of kingdom-type things.
Yeah.
But the Bible's really clear that the very work we do is part, not all of it, but it's part of our kingdom service to God. And when Paul is addressing household servants in Colossians 3, it says, whatever you do, do your work heartily as unto the Lord for, parentheses, and whatever you do, it's the Lord Christ whom you are serving. And that arguably was the most meaningless, mind-numbing grunt work that you can imagine in the first century. Yet Paul very clearly affirms the dignity of that and affirms that the work that these household servants do is actually a part of their daily service to Christ. And if that's true, what that means, then I think what implies is that our work actually has eternal significance. And that the work that we do in the workplace is not going to burn when the Lord returns. It's going to have eternal value because it constitutes a big part, not all of it, of course, a big part of our service to Christ. That's a piece that I think most people in our churches don't get. Yeah. And one of the things I think that we in the pastorate can do a better job of is explaining in more detail how the work in various occupations constitutes service to God.
So give us an example.
Well, let's, we have a lot of business students at Biola, and a lot of accounting students. So I figured, why not take some of the most challenging ones right at the start. So how is accounting ministry? How is auditing a company's books, service to God? And the way it constitutes that is that think of what would happen if nobody could trust the financial statements that companies were putting out quarter after quarter. The lenders, the investors, the general public who buys their products, almost all the constituents of these companies would be left in the dark. And most people who have 401ks, which is almost everybody who's working full-time today, would be left in the dark about what kind of value their investment has for their retirement. And if we view human beings as more than just souls on a stick, that we have bodies that matter, we have earthly life that matters, and that our flourishing depends on more than what goes on in our soul, then what these folks do in their occupation to help the flourishing of individuals and the flourishing of communities is, I think, constitutes kingdom service. Does that make sense?
That not only makes sense, but it I think on a whole lot of levels, it really is significant. And I'm thinking about just the mentality that you do occasionally find, and in some places it's more dominant than others, of, even like, hey, it's all going to burn. What's the point? Even with our bodies. I mean, when you're young especially, you're just like, oh, I don't need this. I'm going to burn out. Better to burn out than to fade away kind of a thing,
Yeah. How about if we do neither?
Yeah. Well, and when you get to our age, you're like, well, gosh, I kind of need this thing called the body in order to keep doing what I'm doing. But I know when I first became a Christian, that was the dominant attitude, not because we were necessarily being taught that from the pulpit, but it's just, we were young and we were excited. And it was just like, who cares about any of that stuff? I don't need to worry about a bank account. I don't need to worry about savings. I don't even need to go to the doctor because, heck, I'm serving the Lord and the Lord's going to come anyway, and we're all going to be out of here. So I mean that, and I think that mentality still exists on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, I think part of it too is that we've misinterpreted that sort of famous saying that there are only two things that last forever.
Yeah.
The Word of God and the souls of human beings.
Yeah.
Well, for one, that's false, because our bodies are going to last forever too. But we've assumed that therefore the only two things that count for eternity are those things that have to do with the soul and the Word of God.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, it's true, but incomplete.
Yeah.
I'm glad you clarified what you said, because I wanted to make sure people didn't think that, you were saying how people might pray for each other at the workplace, but they're doing it after work. They're doing it after work, off the clock, because then there's also the person, and I've known some who they'll have a regular job and they're, constantly witnessing to their fellow employees or whatever the case might be. And this isn't at a Christian job, at a secular job. And they're doing all this Christian work, quote unquote, but they're not getting their actual work done. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of stresses everyone out because, hey, don't we have a job to do here? All you're doing is shoving this Jesus stuff down my throat, and I've got work to do. And so do you, don't you? Mm-hmm. So,
well, I do think the effectiveness with which people listen to that Jesus stuff is in part determined by how well you do your job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you're not doing your job, then I think you're not going to have a very receptive audience.
Yeah. Very true.
I was thinking about this. I was kind of thinking a little bit of a different context. I was thinking about it in regard to politics and in regard to, say, somebody who's running for office. And I was thinking, because I saw this, somebody had put their sign up, vote for me. And the points that they made there were all, faith related. Mm-hmm. And I just had this thought. I think that, especially in public office, only a few people are going to hire you for your faith. You know what I mean? The Christians are going to go, okay, that guy. Everybody else, if they're going to vote for you, it's going to be for something else. So I was thinking how, rather than lead with this big faith thing, I think the faith should be the foundational thing, and because you're trying to get elected to do something to help everybody, not just a particular group of people. It just made me think of Daniel in the mm-hmm. Babylonian court. Daniel's in the Babylonian court. He's doing his job. He's doing his job very efficiently, obviously, because he goes through a number of different administrations and they keep elevating him. They weren't doing that because he was walking around handing out, copies of the Torah. They were doing it because this guy's amazing. He's amazing as a leader and so forth. So anyway, it just got me to thinking, like, I think even in the realm of politics, if more Christian people who are aspiring to go into the political realm, if they would just go, let your faith be your foundation and go in there and just help everybody, because that's what you're supposed to do. And
as God gives you opportunities to talk about it, of course you do so. And that's true in the workplace too.
Yeah.
But I want the people who represent me to be people who I can trust, but I also want them to be very competent at their public office.
Yeah.
And so, faith helps, I think, with the trustworthiness part. It doesn't guarantee competence on the other side.
Yeah, and it doesn't always guarantee trustworthiness either, unfortunately. we have seen that. But true faith, of course.
Yeah, of course.
It does, yeah. Bobby, what do you think? I know you have a few opinions on things.
I think you guys have done a great job. Yeah, there's nothing I feel in particularly led to add to the conversation.
But I would ask this question, Scott. So what, okay, so I'm going to really zero in on my particular job, whatever it is. What, beside just honoring God or beside doing something that is for Him directly, is there any other way that is there anything else that's doing? I mean, obviously it's getting the job done, which is good too.
Well, I think, for one, that what the Scripture indicates is that is doing something directly for Him.
Yeah.
And I think the emphasis here's if we go back just briefly to Genesis, work was ordained in Genesis 1 and 2, not in Genesis 3, which means that the work itself has intrinsic value.
Right.
And this is a tough one, I think, for some people to choke down, but when the Lord returns, we will still be working.
Right.
They beat their swords into plowshares, which are the implements of war, into the implements of productive work. Now, I'm not sure about the paycheck part or all of that, but I think what that suggests is that in both bookends of paradise, work, it plays a pretty significant role, and it has intrinsic value, which means whatever else it accomplishes is gravy, besides what the work itself has that kind of value. So I think if we can sort of maybe substitute the word service for ministry, which is that's the term that most commonly is used in the New Testament term diakonia, then I think we might have a little bit easier time wrapping our arms around the idea that what we're doing in the workplace is service to God, service to our communities. And if we view human beings and communities and families as more than just souls, then the question is, how does my work help these individuals and families and communities to flourish as God intended them to do?
We have a follow-up question about this conversation. It is Cassandra in Riverside. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Cassandra. Thanks for calling 888-564-6173. What did you want to ask Dr. Scott Ray?
Well, he just kind of answered that question. I'm a bartender, so obviously I know that that's not serving the community, but if you're speaking about the Lord to the customers, but he just answered that question basically. But
that's good, because I was going to turn that over to Brian.
Well, you're the one that brought up work now, so you're not going to get off the hook that easy.
No, I appreciate you being in that position where you get a chance to be sort of an armchair therapist to some of the people that you are serving.
And they might consider my words, but at the same time, I've already been contemplating changing.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, and there may, I think what we need to recognize too, Brian, is that in a fallen, broken world, every occupation is going to be somewhat mixed.
Yeah,
it's going to have things that benefit flourishing, but it's also going to have some dark sides.
Yeah, I mean, unless it's just blatantly sinful,
right?
Prostitution, drug dealing.
I'm still waiting for somebody to say that God's called me to be a Playboy photographer. I don't think so.
But I do think, Cassandra, there's something that Paul the Apostle said that I think is really helpful here. He's talking about just serving the Lord in the place we're called. And he's in the context, he's talking about people who are free and people who are a slave. And he said, if you're a slave, don't seek to be free. Just serve the Lord in the context of where you're at. If you can be free, well, great. Use that to serve the Lord too. And so I think unless, like we said, and I don't think bartending is intrinsically sinful. So I think just serve the Lord where you're at. And then if God moves you on to something else, you'll know that. and you'll become either discontent or another opportunity will arise, and you'll say, I think I want to go in that direction. But just, I think, right where you are, just like Scott was saying in the beginning, just whatever you do, do it with all your heart as to the Lord, not to people. So,
would you say too that there are some jobs, some opportunities that Christians don't take because of the connotation? I mean, I think of the entertainment industry and how Hollywood in the 50s and 60s, there was this, what was it? I think it was the Catholic Church or something they came against. I don't remember all the details. Maybe you guys know a little bit more about this, but or I'm making it up as I go along. I don't know. But it's just something where, because Hollywood movies were seen as so awful that the church started telling any Catholic, hey, get out of that industry. And it's gotten worse in the last 60 years.
Yeah, we've abdicated several several really important fields. That's one of them. Mm-hmm. We've also abdicated the secular university, which is why we now call it the secular university. And so, there are a number of those. And fortunately, I think in business, this is still one of the areas of our culture that still has a fairly significant Christian presence as salt and light. And so we encourage people, just be really thoughtful. It may be that God's calling you into pastoral ministry, but to be really careful before you leave the kinds of situations that put you in just regular contact all the time with non-believers, and just to be cautious about that.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Cassandra, thank you for calling us today here on Pastor's Perspective at 888-564-6173. Did you want to say something, Bobby? I can't tell by the look on your...
Am I looking cryptic? Well, maybe a couple things that I would say is there are people that have employment discontentment, and sometimes I really wish that we did a better job as parents and schools in helping match people for a job that is in line with their bent. And so I realize that sometimes, we just have to do what we have to do. But when you read Ecclesiastes and you can just see some of the perspective on toil, work is supposed to be seen as a gift from God. But I would say, don't spend your life hesitant and never pursuing the thing that you could do in life. I mean, a lot of times people stay stuck because they procrastinate or they are perfectionistic and they're fearful of the failure that comes along with trying something new. Some people are in occupations because of the expectations of others, and so they're living for, somebody else and what they have. Other people never get after the dream job because of distractions or complacency. Some are struggling with addiction, and addictions limit capacity, and so then you can't take on more in your life. And so I would just say it's really important to just figure out, who you are, what you love to do. Do you like working with people? Do you like working with data? Do you like working with your hands? Do you like working with your mind? Do you like working with people a lot? Do you like working alone? Just do some personal assessments to try to find a career, if you're young, that would fit kind of your talents and your skill set. And, anything that you go into, then you're going to have to grow in knowledge, skills, and character. I remember reading Ascent of a Leader, not like ascent, but ascent. And it talked about the danger of growing in competence in your work and not growing in your character. And so you're climbing the corporate ladder because you've got this great set of skills and competency, but then you get stuck in this moral dilemma at some point, and then you don't have the character. And the higher you go in an organization without character, the further you have to fall. So when we grow, we need to grow in our knowledge about the role we have and the skills that are required. And then we also have to have a character formation in our endeavors so that we can please the Lord in our environment.
Dr. Scott Ray, about 45 seconds.
Just one thing that the Barna research has shown, that when this is for pastors and church leaders especially, that if churches that have pretty significant attention to this, this field of work and vocation, they'll find when it's addressed in high school and college, those students have a 3 times greater likelihood of staying within their faith and staying within that particular church that they heard this in.
Yeah, interesting. When we come back, I want to ask you a question about this, and right now I can just sort of frame it.
Ask him now, so it gives him 3 minutes to think of his answer.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, just the idea of the will of God in vocation. Like, how do I know that this area that I'm thinking about going in, how would I know? Is this God's will, or is it just something that I want to do?
Good question.
All right.
888-564-6173 to talk about this topic or any topic today on Pastor's Perspective. We are here until 4 p.m. Pacific time on this Wednesday, the 9th of October. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. We've got Pastor Brian Broderson, Dr. Bobby Conway, and Dr. Scott Ray from Biola University. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. And, of course, Pastor's Perspective is sponsored by Biola University, ranked as the most comprehensively Christian university in North America. Biola.edu to learn more. 888-564-6173. This is Pastor's Perspective. Thank you so much for listening and for watching as well on Facebook and YouTube. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. I'm Brian Perez here with Pastor Brian Broderson of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, Dr. Bobby Conway, the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, author of the book, Does Christianity Still Make Sense? And here in the studio with us today, our guest from Biola University, Dr. Scott Ray. So right before the break, we've been talking about work ethic and things of that nature. And Pastor Brian, you asked Dr. Ray.
Yeah, and, I think especially, let's just say, sort of younger, newer Christians. So a younger, newer Christian, they're wondering about, I talk to young people all the time who are even in Bible college, and the big question they have is, what is God's will? What am I going to do when I, finish up school or whatever? So when it comes to vocation, Scott, what would you say to a person? I think sometimes, I have heard this actually many times, a person will think that the thing that they want to do is probably not what is going to be God's will because God obviously wants us to do stuff that we don't want to do.
He wants us all to be missionaries to Africa, the deepest, darkest jungles of Africa. We've heard that so many times.
Yes. So,
well, let me first, I think, point out, a bit of bad advice that we give people. Sort of the popular notion of, do what you love and the money will follow. And that's just simply not true. Mm-hmm. We should amend that to say, do what you love, and if enough people will pay you for that, the money will follow. So I just get that out there right up front. And I think, of course,
I kind of had I'd like to surf, and I thought, I'm just going to do what I love, but there was never any money.
Nobody paid you to.
No, nobody paid me.
Yeah, I've never seen you surf, but I'm not exactly shocked at that idea. But I do think there's a place, I think, for using discernment and discretion, and being clear about what your gifts are. What are you good at? What do you want to do? And there's nothing, I think, in the Scripture that suggests that that God is this cosmic killjoy that wants us to spend our lives doing something we hate, so we can feel like we are of service to Him.
Yeah.
God wants to give us the desires of our heart, assuming that they connect with what He has for us. And then I think most of it is done by trial and error. Mm-hmm. I think you really don't know if you're well suited for something until you actually get in there and try it. Yeah. And so I think it's okay for college students to change their majors a couple of times. Parents may not appreciate me saying that because that may be a little more tuition money and a little more time in college. But I would actually prefer that somebody work some of that stuff out as a college student than in their first 10 years of employment, bouncing from job to job. So I think you will know, I think pretty quickly if something's a good fit for you or not. Mm-hmm. And I think we should be careful not to equate inexperience with incompetence. Just because you're not experienced in something doesn't necessarily mean you're not very good at it. That just means you're not as good at it now as you might be later on. So I wouldn't be afraid of trying something that you think might be a good fit. Of course you pray. Of course you seek counsel of people who you trust. Of course you do an assessment of your gifts and skills. And by the way, it's very rare that I have heard somebody connect their spiritual gifts with what they might be good at in the workplace. Because I think our spiritual gifts are not just for our life in the church; they're for all of life. So that would be my advice: don't be afraid of jumping into something. Try it and see. Yeah. And if God may open a door for you, go for it until it closes.
Yeah. And I think that probably is the biggest issue. It's like, well, what if I choose the wrong thing? What if I go the wrong direction? Okay, well then you can just
so you change direction,
put it in reverse, and go back. And
it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Bobby Conway.
Yeah, those are good words, Scott. I think one thing that I would maybe say that could be good if you are young, before you just go and spend a bunch of money on a degree, try to envision yourself in the role that you're going to be in. Because like Scott said, you might think, I want to be a doctor because it pays a lot. But then you have to also ask, do I want the hours? Do I want to be on call? Do I want to be on my feet? I mean, I took an assessment when I was a teenager, and a report came back and it said a podiatrist would be something that I should consider. Well, that was a stupid response because number one, I don't like feet. And number two, I would hate to be in hospitals all the time. So I think you can take some of these inventories, but you really do got to envision yourself. Like, are you more sedated as a person so you like to sit? Are you more tactile? Do you like to move around? Do you like the idea of having structure? So do you want more of a 9 to 5? Do you like having, a boss for a long-term vision? Or are you more entrepreneurial and you would love to chart a vision and a course? So if you're a mom and a dad, I think realize how important it is to have talks with your kids, because one of the dangers of parenting is when we start telling our kids that they can be anything that they want. No, they can't. I could have wanted to dance like Michael Jackson, but I would have never had an audience. I could have wanted to sing like Steven Tyler, but I would have never had a chance at it. And so that's the whole thing when you're watching American Idol and the mom's standing out the door just hoping her kid's going to get the golden ticket. And, the child opens his mouth to sing, and we know from the first note that this is going to be a disaster, yet the mom's standing there thinking that this is a great thing. And so I think what we owe our kids is Prof. Hendricks, who was a mentor, and I brought him up many times in my own life at Dallas, he said the secret to concentration is elimination. So the quicker you figure out who you aren't, then you can think about who you are. That's key. So we're not everything. So figure out who you are, who you're not. Try to envision the settings that you're going to be in. Ask your mom and dad for some honest assessments. You have to filter that carefully, though, because sometimes mom and dads, they have an idea of what they want you to be that's not in line with the wiring that you have. And so then that's going to create some difficult conversations potentially. So I really do think finding some people that are sages, get some wisdom from people. Ask. So, for example, if you want to take a particular career path, go talk to somebody that does it. Ask them what a day is like in the job. Maybe even go shadow it before you drop $200,000 on the degree and just get a feel, because you might walk in and go, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how busy it is in this office. I didn't realize how on call this is. So I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff here, but I think some of these things can be just helpful insights, and especially moms and dads, be really intentional about helping your kids think how to aim wisely.
What we tell our business students at Biola and our seminary students at Talbot both is that there's no hierarchy of callings in God's economy.
Right.
And there's no, the reformers sort of gave their lives for this notion that all believers are in full-time ministry and full-time service. And you enter full-time service when you come to faith, not when you decide where you're getting a paycheck from.
Yeah.
And nobody leaves full-time service either. I mean, death doesn't even get you out of full-time service because you just change arenas of service. So I think that's another, I think, important part of this to remember.
Yeah, great stuff. Good.
888.
And hey, there's one other last thing,
go for it.
Brian, just as I'm thinking, really come to terms with your motive for why you're going to do what you're going to do. Because like what Scott's saying here is like the whole idea of doing something for God. It's really tough. I can remember before I planted my first church, I kept praying, God, sanctify my ambitions, sanctify my ambitions. And I look back, and as much as I prayed for my ambitions to be sanctified, as some of them were jacked up, as some of them still are. We just are kind of a mixed bag as people. But here's the thing that we can know about ourselves. It's not good to like, for example, if you're driven by power, then be aware of how you'll come off as a person. You might be a user instead of a team player. So don't chase power. Chase the heart of God. Don't chase money, like as Scott said. Because all that, according to Ecclesiastes, this stuff's just chasing the wind. Don't chase the approval of others. Don't chase something out of comparison and envy, because that's rooted in insecurity. Really find, that's the benefit. Once you know who you are and who you're doing it for, then you can lead from a secure place. And as I've said before, when I used to speak for Family Life Today and their Weekend to Remember Marriage conferences, there was a wise platform teacher that said something. And he said, the most fulfilled people in life are those that know their master, have met the right mate, and know their mission. And I thought that was some great advice, because many people, they think about their mission before pleasing their master. Or some people think about, I got to have a mate, but they don't really think about their master. But if we know our master, Jesus, and we get to know him, and we ask him to lead us to the right spouse, and then out of that, we also can get a life purpose. There's real meaning in life when you know your master, you have a fulfilled marriage to your mate, and you figure out the code for what you've been created for, and you know your mission.
Yeah, great. The only thing I would say is I would just, for the sake of those who don't have a mate, that's not essential, obviously.
Of course.
Knowing your master and knowing your mission is really the two key components. And then if the mate is part of it, then that's great. But it's not always the case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Concur.
888-564-6173. Let's go to the phones. Here is Sarai calling from Menifee. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Sarai.
Hello.
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 I was reading in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 through 2, and I was wondering, it said that the earth was created and the wood, and I was wondering, like, was the earth created like already there when God was like, I don't know how to say it.
Because God was hovering over the waters, right?
Yeah.
So you're wondering if it was empty already,
Yeah.
or if it was water already.
Is that Mom helping you in the background there?
Yeah.
Hi, Mom. Okay, Brian, what do you say to Sarai?
Well, Sarai, I just have to say this before I even attempt to answer this question. It is amazing to me that you are reading your Bible, you're reading Genesis chapter 1, and you've come up with such a sophisticated question. This is quite impressive. So I think you're a very intelligent young lady. So, yes, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. That's what it says in verse 2. And then verse 3 says, and God said, let there be light. And so it seems like verse 1 is telling us that God, in the beginning, he created all the matter. And then in verse 2, it tells us the state of the matter when God created, which is, at this point, it's formless. It's not put in the form that it's going to be in. But then God begins with let there be light, and he begins to form the formless matter. So I don't know if that is helpful for you, but...
Well, you should probably talk about tohu wabohu and the disambiguity that was going on there for her. That might...
I thought about it, but then I thought, oh, that's Bobby's department.
Yes.
He's into tohu wabohu. Sarai, did that help you at all?
Yeah, but I was also wondering, it's like water mostly emptiness?
Water, what was that? Did you say water?
Water
Yes.
emptiness?
So the earth was without form and void. So was everything empty, I think is what,
Well,
it says here on the...
yeah. Bobby just said those funny words.
Say them again, Bobby.
Those are
tohu wabohu.
those are Hebrew words, and those are the words that are in the, because the Old Testament that you're reading in Genesis there was originally written in Hebrew. And those words speak of a state of, like a state of emptiness, like something that's barren, something that's not yet fruitful or flourishing. So it's almost like if you just think of maybe like what a really barren desert would look like. So if you went to Africa and you went to the Sahara Desert, you would just see miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of nothing but sand. There's no trees, there's no bushes, there's no shrubs, there's nothing. It's just all sand. So it's pretty much empty, right? So think of it kind of like that. And then as you continue to read, God begins to put the different things in place in the earth and in the heavens.
So like if it was a coffee cup, there's a coffee cup, but it's empty. So we could say that the cup is there, but there's nothing in it. But the cup is there. So was the earth there? Was that sphere there?
Yeah, I think that's what it says. Yeah,
Okay.
the earth was there.
Okay. Bobby or Dr. Scott Ray, any thoughts? All right, let's move on. Sarai, thank you for calling us today here on Pastor's Perspective.
I was thinking of the Jesus Bible storybook by Sally Lloyd Jones.
Yes.
She just does such an extraordinary job, both with the way she communicates things verbally and also with the illustration. So maybe if you have that, Sarai, maybe just look at the pictures in the first few pages of that book. I think that might help you.
Yep, the Jesus Storybook Bible. That's a great resource that we recommended often here on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173. Let's go to Ryan in Fallbrook. What did you want to ask us today, Ryan?
Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask about the arguments for babies before they're born, like for their personhood. I was talking to a friend, and he said, a non-believer friend, he said he doesn't think that babies are people until they get consciousness. And I was just wondering what you thought about that, if there's any good arguments.
Okay, Dr. Scott Ray, what would you say?
I think that's sort of in my wheelhouse. So I'll give it a
little.
shot.
Absolutely.
I have thought about that a bit. I appreciate your question, Ryan. What I would ask is what's so special about consciousness, for one, because there are lots of times when you don't have consciousness as a full adult human being, yet nobody would deny that you are a full person. Take someone who, for example, is under general anesthesia. If it's working like it's supposed to, you are completely unconscious. Or say you're in a reversible coma, for example, or I think for some people, even in a really deep sleep, you might be unconscious. And so the response to that typically is that, well, that's just temporary, and they'll come out of that. But to make that counter argument, you're really shooting yourself in the foot, because you're admitting that something else besides consciousness is essential for that person being still regarded as a person while they are without consciousness. So I think that's one sort of common, what we call a decisive moment for determining when you have a person. But really the difference between an unborn child one day before consciousness and one day after is really not very much. And I would say partly the reason that I would say that we have a person from conception forward is because from that point on, the embryo has all the capacities it will ever have. It has all the capacities it will need to mature into a fully adult person. We're just waiting for those to be actualized on a specific schedule that is appropriate for their stage of development.
What do you think, Ryan?
That makes pretty good sense. I actually brought that up to my friend. What about anesthesia or whatever? And then he said basically that, well, as long as you had consciousness in the past, you would count as a person.
Well, I guess my response to that is that there's a reason why an unborn child does not have consciousness at a particular point, because it's developmentally appropriate. It's that stage of maturity. And I say, just because you had consciousness in the past, I say, so what? That's kind of an arbitrary, I think, an arbitrary distinction to make. It's you don't have consciousness now, and people who make this argument for consciousness will also say at the end of life, if you lose consciousness, say somebody who's in a vegetative state, then you no longer qualify as a person. And the fact that you've had consciousness in the past is irrelevant to that. And I think they're right about that. Consciousness is irrelevant. Now, they're still a person because your personhood does not depend on whether you are conscious or not.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts, Brian?
Nope.
Okay, so Dr. Scott Ray, which one of your dozen or so books do you think might address this topic best? I highly recommend the book Body and Soul, called Human Nature and the Crisis in Ethics. My colleague J.P. Moreland and I did that together, where we defend personhood philosophically and then we apply it to these various areas in bioethics. Okay, very good. So check that out if you want to, Ryan. It's called Body and Soul by Dr. Scott Ray and J.P. Moreland. 888-564-6173. Almost out of time, but I want to take this question that was sent in online. It's from Kim. Until about 5 years ago, I was living a homosexual lifestyle. Then I found God and have been celibate and single ever since. Sometimes something will bring up a memory from when I was living in sin. Quite often, these are good memories, even though I know I was sinning. My question is, am I sinning when I think fondly of these memories of my sinful past? Pastor Brian, what do you say to Kim?
Well, I would say you could be, but you are not necessarily. And I mean, it depends on, what parts of your past life you're thinking fondly about. I mean, if you're thinking just about the relational components of it, well, it was a relational thing that there were certain aspects to it that were enjoyable and you maybe had a deep friendship or something like that. So I don't think that would be a problem. I think if you were looking back fondly on maybe sexual experiences that are, contrary to what God allows for us, then I would just say that you need to make sure that you don't go too far down a road with that. Because like we all know, stuff can come into your head at lightning speed. You can suddenly be thinking about something and enjoying something before you even realize what you're thinking about and enjoying. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, I don't think that's sin. If you say, wow, this is kind of cool. Yeah, I remember that. And then you start going down the road. That's when you're going into the area where you would, eventually, if you keep going there, you're going to cross over into sin. So, but I don't think that just thinking about pleasant aspects of the past. All of us who are now believers were at one time unbelievers, and all of us had experiences in our past life that were enjoyable, even though we were sinners. And even though in some cases, maybe the larger context was a sinful context, but it didn't take away from the reality that was a pleasurable experience. So I don't think that would be, I wouldn't say that would be sin.
And it would be almost impossible to get, because anything, like you said, anything can trigger. It could be a song, it could be a coffee shop. There's so many different things that you could say, oh, I remember when we went there and whatever. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I commend her for the decision out of faithfulness to Christ to be celibate.
Absolutely.
And I think that's highly commendable. And I think it is entirely possible, if you are same-sex attracted, to be faithful to Christ by choosing to live a life of celibacy.
Absolutely.
We are out of time on today's episode of Pastor's Perspective. Thank you so much for joining us on the radio, or maybe you were watching online today on Facebook or YouTube, or maybe you're listening on a podcast, because we archive all of our episodes on Facebook and YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I heard there was a problem with our Spotify podcast, so we're looking into that so that we can get that fixed ASAP. But thank you for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow between 3 and 4 p.m. Pacific time. To find out more about Biola University, the most comprehensively Christian university in North America, go to biola.edu, where you can also find out about our guest today, Dr. Scott Ray. And if you find his bio there, you will see all the different books that he's written, including the one that we mentioned earlier, Body and Soul. But there's 12, 15? How many have you written?
I lost count.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. God bless. And we'll talk to you tomorrow here on Pastor's Perspective.